The end of the last century was marked by great changes in society. The world experienced the consequences of colonial policies and a surge of nationalism. Against this background, the disintegration of the largest country in the world at that time, the USSR, unfolded. At the same time, another union of republics, Yugoslavia, collapsed. In the process of secession, many countries had to struggle for their independence. For example, this was the case in the Balkans, where numerous Yugoslav wars distinguished themselves with the most brutality and losses since Vietnam. The beginning of the dissolution started with the death of Josip Broz Tito. Without a strong dictatorial hand, propaganda about the United Nations ceased to influence people of different ethnicities and religions. The state began to feud due to the uneven distribution of resources among the republics. The richest, Slovenia and Croatia, did not want to share with Montenegro and Macedonia. Yugoslavia's total debt was 17 billion. The final straw was the updated constitution of President Slobodan Milosevic, which increased pressure on local military forces and excluded most of the rights of the autonomous republics. Eventually, the collapse of the USSR initiated a movement for the independence of Croatia and Slovenia. At the end of 1990, Slovenia held a referendum for independence. About 90% of the population of the republic, most of them Slovenes, supported the withdrawal from Yugoslavia. Military actions were inevitable, so Slovenia began to gather forces. In the summer of 1991, the Slovenes and Croats officially declared independence from Yugoslavia. Thus began the 10-day war. As expected, Slobodan Milosevic accused Slovenia and Croatia of treason. The Yugoslav National Army, or JNA in short, mostly of Serbs, began a movement towards Slovenia, capturing the capital Ljubljana without resistance. The parties were not yet willing to shed blood. However, in an attack on Ljubljana airport, the JNA opened fire on Slovenian units. Unsuccessful fighting continued for several days in different parts of the country. The Slovenes used their mountainous terrain to wage a guerrilla war against the skilled Yugoslavs. They sabotaged the enemy's ammunition depots and radio towers. The deaths of Austrian and German journalists finally caught the EU's attention. Under pressure from foreign diplomats and the president of Slovenia, the Yugoslav government agreed to sign the Brioni Agreement, which granted Slovenia independence. A total of about 100 people were killed and about 400 injured in the clashes. Macedonia detached without any fights and quickly gained recognition of independence from the world community. Slovenia won the Blitzkrieg. Croatia, unlike them, was forced to fight for independence. The Serbs responded by remembering the Croats' genocide during World War II. The JNA attacked Croatia from the southwest, but stopped as a result of a counterattack. At the end of the summer, a symbolic siege began in the town of Vukovar. The 2,000th Croatian garrison faced tens of thousands of Serbs for 3 months. The Battle of Vukovar raised the morale of the Croats and dashed the hopes of the Serbs for a quick takeover of Croatia. However, the overall situation was very difficult. On the territory of Croatia, there is a Serbian country. On the territory of Bosnia, the Serbian Republic, and both entities wished to join Serbia. Despite the Serbian airstrikes on Zagreb, Croatia not only stopped all JNA offensives, but also launched a counterattack. It was here that the first ethnic cleansing of the Yugoslav wars took place. The Serbs shot about 1,600 Croats, and the town of Vukovar was almost destroyed. Finally, under pressure from the UN and the possibility of a conflict in Bosnia, which erupted next January, the fire ceased. The UN took control of Vukovar almost before the end of the war and recognized Croatia and Slovenia as independent countries and granted them membership status. The situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina differed the most. Bosnia and Herzegovina also held a referendum for independence. Almost half of the population were Muslims who were pro-independence, as well as the Bosnian Croats. The conflict, which had both ethnic and religious grounds, was fast approaching. For the second time in a century, the murder in Sarajevo became the occasion for war. This time, Muslim Bosniaks killed the groom's father at the wedding for carrying the banner of the Serbian church. In response, next month, the Serbian Volunteer Guard crossed the border into Bosnia and started a massacre, killing about 100 civilians, most of whom were Muslims. At the same time, with the actions in Sarajevo, the JNA began to cross the rivers with the intention to quickly capture Bosnia. They constantly attacked the capital of Bosnia, but resistance prevented them from advancing. At Sarajevo airport, however, the Yugoslavs succeeded in capturing the president of Bosnia, and thus establishing a front line around Sarajevo that lasted until the end of the conflict. A third of Bosnia's Serb population had formed a new state, the Republika Srpska, and wanted to join Serbia. The situation was exacerbated by Croatia's interference in the conflict. As a result, the Bosniaks fought both against the Serbs and against the Croats, prolonging the war by 4 years and making it the bloodiest since Vietnam. Over time, famine began in Sarajevo. The humanitarian corridor to which food and medicine were delivered from Europe is beginning to be used to supply the Bosniaks with weapons. When the Serbs shoot down an Italian transport plane, they close the airspace over the territory of Bosnia. During the war, the Serbs organized concentration camps for the Bosnians, where they killed, starved, and tortured. In 2 years, in the town of Foča, Serbian military and officers killed about 3,000 people. Foča was also noted as a town of sexual abuse camps, where thousands of women were raped, hundreds of them many times. Even girls as young as 14 were raped. Bosniaks, in turn, massively shot Croats. It went so far as to capture Serbian peacekeepers from the UN. The world community also reacted when Dutch UN peacekeepers handed over hundreds of Muslim Bosniaks hiding at the base to the Serbs. The US then realized the weakness of the UN strategy. In particular, the NATO alliance was shaken by the Serb massacre of 8,000 Bosniak civilians in the town of Srebrenica in 1995. It was the Srebrenica massacre that prompted the US president to disregard the UN's permission, which Russia and China had stalled. NATO countries fully joined the conflict and began bombing Bosnian Serb positions. Only then was Slobodan Milosevic persuaded to negotiate and sign the peace. The independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina was immediately considered, and sanctions were imposed on Serbia. As a result of peace for several years, a conventional balance has been established between the countries of Yugoslavia. At least 100,000 people died in the war. Between 25,000 and 50,000 women were raped. It was only 2 years later that the riots in Albania began. Albania faced massive protests from citizens because of the country's pyramid schemes. As a result, the protesters robbed many military units. To settle the conflict, a UN corps of 7,000 men was sent to Albania. The riots continued until almost the end of the summer, killing about 1,500 people. Most importantly, it has given rise to decisive action by Kosovo. In 6 months, the Kosovo Albanians would start a confrontation against Serbia. They demanded independence, and the Serbian authorities wanted to assert the region. The confrontation quickly escalated into a full-fledged civil war. Again, civilians were killed. Negotiations and a temporary truce came to nothing. The world insisted on Kosovo's independence, but Belgrade refused to give back that territory. After several attempts to resolve the conflict, the Russian Federation intervened in diplomacy, supporting the Serb position. Hostilities with ethnic cleansing resumed. Hundreds of thousands of Kosovo Albanians were forced to leave their homes, resulting in a catastrophic number of refugees from the country. Even direct ultimatums did not influence the actions of Slobodan Milosevic. In response, NATO launched Operation Allied Force with the aim of bringing Belgrade out of the war. The Yugoslav army faced the opponent that was too strong. For the bombardment of the targets, NATO has formed an association with a total strength of more than 1,000 aircraft and used more than 60,000 troops. In addition to the F-16 fighters, the most advanced aircraft of the time, such as the tactical strike aircraft Lockheed F-117, Bomber B-2, and Douglas AV-8B were used. The Air Force launched the operation without UN approval. In 78 days, more than 23,000 bombs and missiles were dropped on military warehouses, air defense buildings, Interior Ministry and Defense Ministry buildings, factories, oil storage facilities, railways, and numerous infrastructure facilities. The total damage to Serbia was estimated at about $30 billion. As a result of a mistake, US troops destroyed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, for which they publicly apologized and paid compensation. Despite early warnings of NATO bombing sites, between 1,500 and 2,000 lives were lost, although the exact number of casualties is still disputed, and about 13,000 people were reported missing. The fighting also led to a change of government. Serbs were constantly expelled from state institutions and administrations. Belgrade knew that it had lost this war as well. In the end, the NATO bombing forced Serbia to make peace. Under the Treaty of Kumanovo, Serbia withdrew its troops, and Kosovo was granted autonomy under the patronage of peacekeeping organizations. In 9 years, Kosovo will declare independence, recognized by the majority of NATO countries. Yugoslavia will continue to exist as a confederation of Serbia and Montenegro. In the autumn of 2000, during the presidential election, the bulldozer revolution took place with the storming of the Central Television Building and the ousting of Milosevic. The following year, 2001, Milosevic was arrested and transferred to the Hague Court, where he was charged with dozens of crimes, including torture, genocide, the establishment of concentration camps, etc. He did not wait for the verdict and died in a cell in 2006. This year, Yugoslavia finally ceased to exist when the Republic of Montenegro voted in a referendum for independence from Serbia. The establishment of concentration camps has been recognized by world society as one of the worst parts of these conflicts. Their cruelty was compared only to that of the Third Reich. As a result, the International Court brought to justice more than 100 Serbs and nearly 40 Croats convicted in The Hague. Among them were those responsible for the massacre in Srebrenica. During the Balkan Crisis, as it is now called, at least 12 concentration camps were created. Most of them were created by Serbs. Yugoslavia has shown the world yet another too expensive lesson. In addition to violence, torture, and genocide, massive organ trafficking has become a real shock. Despite the peace a quarter of a century later, the tension between the former Yugoslav countries and Serbia still exists today, so most of them have joined NATO.